Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be continuing the Extra History series on the history of paper money, which should be fun. The first episode, like a lot of Extra History series that I've seen so far, sets a lot of the foundation. We didn't get much paper money. We got a lot of things that could be considered money, and if this can be money, why can't paper be money? But we didn't actually get a whole lot of paper money related stuff. So I'd imagine now we have to actually get into that. I saw the title and it says, not just noodles. And I was thinking, oh, is pasta going to be money? And I'm like, no, they can't go down that road. We've already done the stuff setting the foundation, showing like all the possible things that can be money. So now we have to be getting into some form of paper money, right? I would assume. So what's the first form of paper money? It must be like just a written IOU. I cannot think of anything else that could have gone before that, but maybe I'm wrong. So I'm excited to see what direction this goes. Let's get started.
While there's little truth to the idea that Marco Polo brought pasta to Italy from the East, there's another marvel that the book about his travels popularized. It was an idea, a radical one, which is perhaps best summarized by the very title of the chapter that discusses it. For in the Book of the Marvels of the World, or as we know it, The Travels of Marco Polo, there's a chapter titled, How the Great Khan Caused the Bark of Trees, Made into Something Like Paper, to Pass for Money Throughout His Realm.
Okay, So Genghis Khan, I guess I'm not surprised that paper money could be traced back to him. While he gets a bad rep for some very good reasons, he's often portrayed as just this savage, barbaric dude, and like that stuff is there, but in a lot of ways he was very much ahead of his time, especially when you talk about economically. I have seen how he managed his empire a little bit. I've gotten previews of that in some classes that I've taken, though I'm not well versed in him. I understand that he's a lot more than the popular portrayal of him, so yeah, I totally get how that could work.
In ancient China, they invented a coinage system where the coins had holes punched in them. So if you needed to measure out large denominations, you could just run a string through the center of the coins, and a particular length of string would hold 100 or 1,000 at once. But over time, the economy evolved, transactions got bigger, and merchants found themselves needing tens or hundreds of thousands of coins to complete.
So for those of you who know anything about Chinese currency, I remember distinctly as a kid, we had a student who came from China who was in my classes, and on his book bag he had little coins hooked onto it, and they had the little square in the center of them. I don't know if those were a novelty or if they still use that currency. I'm sure I could find it out just by Googling it, but this seems like it stuck around. So that's kind of cool, assuming those were actual like currency and they weren't some other form of circular metal with a square in it. But I distinctly remember that from my childhood. So that's kind of fun that this was brought up.
Got bigger, and merchants found themselves needing tens or hundreds of thousands of coins to complete transactions. And of course, a strand of 1,000 of these weighed about 10 pounds already, so it became a real pain in the neck to transport them. So the government started saying, how about we pay you pieces of paper that have the amount of coins we owe you written on them, and you can come pick up your coins at the capital whenever you want your money. And since the government bought a lot of things, these paper slips started being circulated everywhere. Soon, merchants realized that these slips of paper were always good, that they could be turned in at the capital for however much was written on them whenever they wanted. So heck.
Okay, I get where they're going. Like, this goes from being kind of like a check that you can cash in to something that you can pass around like it's money. Okay, like I already kind of get the direction that this is going, because like all the forms of money seem to have a very similar path of development.
Heck, why even go to the trouble of turning them in? Why not just trade the slips of paper to other merchants for their goods? Thus, the merchants began using these promissory notes, or essentially government IOUs, as money. And then the government caught on and simply started printing up money. So by the time we got the Travels of Marco Polo, paper money was widespread, and this idea started to catch on even outside of China.
Yeah, like theoretically, you could just print money, and if everybody believes it, it is worth something. But it is good that they had kind of a banking system behind it that would say, yes, we will accept these things, and we will give you your money in exchange when you need it. So, like, that's one of the big things in early U.S. history. People were very skeptical of banks, and a lot of them wanted to work with hard money. But when the banking system was established, it made it much easier to ensure that the paper money that did exist would actually be worth something, because these banks would accept that money.
Sometimes with little success, like when Gekatu, the corrupt Ikan of the Middle East, tried to introduce paper money after he'd already splurged the royal money, and had his economy collapse to a cow plague. He basically fell prey to the misconception that simply printing money was literally a way to print money. Needless to say, he was promptly strangled with a bowstring. But
Oh, geez. Yeah, well, if you've already... Like, the reason the money would actually mean anything is because you have money to begin with. You have something inherently valued that money represents. And if he's already used up the royal money, then, yeah, there's nothing really backing that. There's no confidence in that money system that he's trying to make.
sometimes in other places, the idea started to take stronger hold, especially Italy. The Italian city-states had already been playing with this idea a little. They were the economic dynamos of Europe, and the first truly great trading cities on the continent since the ancient world. They were also basically always at war. This made carrying around great heaping piles of cash a wee bit of a danger. So the merchants came up with a new system, influenced by the tales from China. At first, they began simply issuing promissory notes, basically IOUs. Merchants would get to a new town and stock up on supplies and trade goods, but
So with the order of this, like, I thought it was just going to be standard IOU stuff before we get, like, banking, but then we go into the East, and they are using banking to back the IOUs. So actually, the banking seems to come first in this particular narrative. I don't know if there are earlier examples. I'm sure people used IOUs in some capacity beforehand, but maybe a little less formal. But yeah, that's kind of interesting that essentially banking came first.
IOUs. Merchants would get to a new town and stock up on supplies and trade goods, but rather than carrying the cash to pay for them across dangerous country, they would just give the seller an IOU, often backed by a very famous or wealthy merchant, promising to pay for the goods at a later date. But here's the trick. To keep anybody from having to haul all that money around, the merchant wouldn't ever actually end up paying the seller directly. Instead, he would just pay a bank in his hometown. Here's how it would work. The merchant selling the goods would take the promissory note he got for them to his local bank, which he had access to, unlike most of Europe, because the Crusades had accidentally created modern banking. Why let a little crusade get in the way of a good story about fiscal instruments? So, he would take the note down to the bank and cash it in for slightly less than its face value. Basically, the bank was buying the note from him for some amount less than it was worth. Then the bank, which would have branches in other cities, would send a rider with a stack of these notes out to whatever specific city those notes had originally come from. When the rider got to the city, he would hand them to the local branch of the bank, and then the local branch would go collect from the merchant who had bought the goods. So the merchant could pay for goods in a far-off location by paying his local bank after the fact. A pretty huge step forward for commerce. But what if the bank didn't have a branch in the merchant's hometown? Well, then the bank would just sell the promissory note to another bank that did have one there. So these promissory notes sort of started to take on a value of their own.
So we're getting into, like, the paper money stuff. We haven't gotten into counterfeiting yet, and I mentioned that a little bit in the previous one, and I was excited to get into that stuff, and I'm surprised that we haven't encountered that yet. Like, we had the guy who tried to print worthless money, and that's always fun. I talked about my home state and how we have a history of printing worthless money. But we haven't gotten any counterfeiting yet, and I would love to know how they prevented counterfeiting in these earlier systems. Like, we see in the US, our money, it gets more and more marks on it. It looks more complex than it did when I was a kid. Like, the $1 bill looks a little bit more complicated. Like, we've got, like, the $100 bill has, like, that weird strip through it. That's weird. We have all sorts of things that are supposed to help us tell if something's counterfeit or not. Now, I'm curious to what they did back then and how intricate it might have been.
People started trading these notes, and soon the banks got in on the action and just let you take out notes from the bank itself if you had the deposits to cover it. But
Banknotes.
this didn't reach its full form for quite some time. Fast forward about 300 years and move halfway across the continent to the little island hanging off of Italy's side. The year is 1640.
Yeah, whoever that is.
The never popular Charles I's monarchy is deeply in debt. He had gotten into a tiff with the parliament and basically disbanded it for over a decade.
Oh, I know this guy. He's I don't know too much about him, but I know what's going to happen here. What a mad lad. This is great.
But, according to English law, Parliament is the only group allowed to levy taxes, which you do need when you're a king and flat broke. But not Charles. No. He had all sorts of crazy schemes for bringing in money without calling on Parliament. So miffed he was at them. And in 1640, we have one fine example. He just seized all the money in the mint. And this is kind of a big deal because it wasn't his money in the mint. All the merchants and the goldsmiths of London deposited their hard currency at the mint, just as a place to store it. So the king just picked up all that cash and declared it to be another one of his ever-popular forced loans. And then he proceeded to also seize all of the East India Company's pepper, just to add a strange, if somewhat delectable twist to this tale. Needless to say, his head was promptly separated from his body.
Yeah, I heard about him seizing all the money, and I was like, oh, there's no way you can do that. And that totally undermines the credibility of the financial system if any executive can come in and just do that. And yeah, that's about how that would go down.
Which leaves us in the aftermath with a bunch of merchants and goldsmiths. The merchants and goldsmiths got together, and the goldsmiths basically said, look, we have these giant vaults for storing all of our gold. If you want to pay us a small amount, you can rent a corner of the vault to put all of your money in. This rapidly evolved to the goldsmiths paying people small amounts of interest to leave their money with them in exchange for the right to lend it out. This basically made them into banks.
Yeah.
And in their capacity as banks, when people would deposit their money, the goldsmiths would basically give the depositor a receipt, which they could turn back in to claim their money. But soon, these goldsmiths made a pivotal switch. They changed from making out receipts, which could only be redeemed by the person who originally made the deposit, to also offering receipts that could be redeemed by whomever held them. This allowed people to start using their receipts as currency. Rather than pay for something with a pile of coins, why not just put that pile of coins in the bank and pay for stuff with these far more convenient receipts?
So these receipts would be good because they would have about as much credibility as the goldsmith themselves has. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, like, okay, I'm thinking about ways that this could be undermined, but no, like, if they have... The receipts themselves even have how much money they have in there on them, and they'd be verified by this particular goldsmith. So unless it's a sketchy goldsmith, that actually seems like a pretty stable system.
Of course, as soon as they started doing this, people began to ask for multiple receipts in small, regular denominations. So you'd go to the bank, you'd drop off 20 quid, and ask the nice fellow at the register to give you 20 receipts for £1 apiece, so that you could go out and buy some vegetables or something with them. As soon as you do that, you basically have the banknote, the fundamental form of paper money. And the goldsmiths were clever folk. They started to notice the funny thing about banknotes. These banknotes were starting to get passed around from hand to hand without often getting handed back in at the bank, which meant that the bankers could keep playing around with the money those notes were supposed to represent even as they circulated through the markets. After all, so long as everybody doesn't try to turn in their banknotes at once, the bank can lend more money than it actually has in its vaults.
So by the end, we're going to get into financial collapse, possibly like Great Depression type stuff, maybe. By the time we get to the end, but yeah, I guess they'd be able to do loans and stuff and investments and such as long as they have enough to satisfy when people try to pick up their money, but also the fact that they are playing around with your money, that does create a sort of risk. It is a little bit of a gamble having your money in there. Like before I felt a little secure with it, but now you're introducing stuff that feels much more modern, much more scary, but I don't know how much people thought about it. I don't think much of it when I have like all my money in the bank, so I assume they were probably thinking about the same. Like, yeah, it's just sitting in a vault somewhere, waiting for me to get it. No, nobody's touching it, don't worry.
One banknote is circulating its way from hand to hand. The bank can use the coins that note represents to cover somebody else turning their banknote in. And thus, fractional reserve banking was born, instantly expanding the money supply of England. But not without introducing some dangers. Join us next time as we move from these Wild West beginnings to the even wilder West personas that attempted to make paper money official.
I'm excited about that. I assume he doesn't mean like literal Wild West stuff, because that's a little bit too early. I really like this one. I'm not wonderful with economics, but this is very basic, and it's explained in such a simple way, and they're so good at this sort of stuff. This has been a wonderful series, and it's a nice change of pace from the others. Like, its style is just a little bit different. The subject matter is a little bit different from all the other series I've checked out, so this has been really cool. If there's any other extra history stuff you want me to check out in the future, let me know. I'm going to be putting up a poll in the future. I need to know what goes in that poll, so give me suggestions in the comment section below. Become a member, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff, and I will see you guys next time. All right.